Welcome back, everyone. Thank you. So, kia ora. And it's a great pleasure to introduce our Trade, Export and Growth Minister, Damian O'Connor. For many of us, the Minister is well known. He was first elected to Parliament in 1993, and through periods of government and opposition, he has consistently been a voice for rural communities and the agricultural sector. As a Member of Parliament for the West Coast Tasman, he has been an equally loud voice for equality and opportunity. So it is no surprise then that Mr O'Connor is also Minister for Rural Communities, along with holding the portfolios of agriculture, biosecurity and land information. Minister O'Connor has been in the job for barely a month, but in that time he's been able to announce the conclusion and signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This trade agreement between 15 economies in the Asia-Pacific region is a beacon for us as New Zealand looks to trade to recover from the economic impacts of COVID-19. Minister, thank you very much for joining us today for this Auckland Trade and Economic Policy School. Thank you.
Kia ora. Ko Paparoa te maunga, ko Kawatiri te awa, ko Ngāti Ireland te tau iwi, ko Damien O'Connor, toko ingoa, tēnā koto, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you for the introduction. It is indeed a pleasure to be here at this very learned place, and with a group of people who kind of scare me a bit. As someone who's been in the job for a month, I look around the room and there's a huge amount of knowledge, of experience, and wisdom. So I'll try to offer you something that is worthwhile. I have to say a couple of things. Firstly, acknowledge Stephen Jacoby. We just had a brief meeting, but he worked for Jim Sutton when I was in Parliament. If you've been in Parliament long enough, you see a few people cycle through the system. And Stephen's daughter worked in my office too over the last 3 years. So I have been kind of connected through osmosis to trade policy for quite some time, and hopefully it's helped me. But again, thank you for the opportunity to say a few words here today. And I do want to recognise the hard work of the University of Auckland's Public Policy Institute in putting together this event. I understand it's the second birthday, so wonderful. Bringing together internationally recognised leaders and thinkers on trade and economic policy with exporters, with business leaders, diplomats, economists, academics and government is indeed essential to ensuring New Zealand's trade policy is benefiting all New Zealanders and is constructively debated. I'm looking forward to a stimulating discussion here today and hopefully not offending anyone, although I have been known to do that occasionally. I come from an Irish background where debate was part and parcel of progress, and so I hope that a forum like this does generate robust debate, because we're in an interesting world. There's no simple answer, so through debate and discussion hopefully we arrive at those answers. I want to begin by emphasising the central role of trade in the government's wider work programme over this coming term. We find ourselves at a time of unparalleled international crisis. The world faces the greatest public health emergency since the global flu pandemic a century ago. The ensuing economic shock represents the largest global downturn since the Great Depression. In the face of this, the Prime Minister recently laid out our three overarching objectives as a government. Firstly, to keep New Zealanders safe from COVID-19. Secondly, to accelerate our economic recovery. And thirdly, to lay the foundations for a better future. Trade is crucial to our success in meeting all three of these objectives. We are a global exporter. Based at the bottom of the world, imports and exports are our lifeblood, essential to our quality of life and our well-being. Prior to the pandemic, about half of all New Zealanders' jobs came from the tradable sector. Firms in the tradable sector are 54% more productive. They employ more New Zealanders when they start exporting, and they pay more compared to other firms in the non-export sectors. The pandemic has also brought into stark relief just how essential imports are to New Zealand's economic success and well-being. Imports of COVID-19 testing kits and PPE and imports as inputs to our own production processes are critical. New Zealand business operate as part of a complex international supply chain, and the risk that a loss of air connectivity posed to our people, to our economy during the COVID-19 lockdown underscores how vital trade is to New Zealand. But throughout this pandemic, our trade has held up remarkably well. My farmer friends want to say it's all their doing. In part, yes. Merchandise exports have largely kept pace with or exceeded last year's, which is incredible during one of the biggest recessions the global economy has seen. And just as we have seen exports lead us through the worst of this crisis, it's my intention that exports will lead our recovery from it. Our successful response to COVID-19 provides New Zealand with a unique opportunity to position ourselves globally as a safe and secure place to trade with, to invest in, and eventually, we hope, of course, to visit again. That's why we've developed our trade recovery strategy and our Trade for All agenda to seize this opportunity, to accelerate New Zealand's economic recovery and lay the foundations for that better future. But make no mistake, New Zealand faces some very challenging global trade landscapes. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, New Zealand faced significant headwinds in global trade. The World Trade Organization and its system of trade rules, which puts small countries like ours on an even footing with global powers, has been under growing pressure on a number of fronts. Protectionism and strategic competition, most notably, of course, between China and the US, has threatened the stability of international trade. The escalating tariff disputes between the US and China caused trade to fall sharply, with global ramifications. As a small export-orientated economy, it is hard to overstate the importance to New Zealand of a trading system underpinned by rules rather than economic influence, or an economic might is right attitude. COVID-19 has unfortunately exacerbated many of the international challenges that we already faced. COVID-19 responses around the globe have disappointingly been accompanied by a sharp increase in trade distortions, most commonly, of course, increases in subsidies. These make it harder for New Zealand to compete fairly. We've seen the effect of those distortions in global trade flows. Initial estimates for the second quarter of 2020, when the virus and lockdown spread around the world, indicated a year-on-year drop of around 18.5% in the volume of global merchandise trade. New Zealand GDP contracted by 2% in the year to 2020. This was much better much better economic performance than many expected back in February and March. Indeed, since June, we've seen our economic performance continue to outstrip expectations, with measures such as Treasury's New Zealand Activity Index showing economic activity levels in October higher than at the same time last year. However, given recent second waves of COVID-19 in many parts of the world, Treasury now expects the global impacts of COVID-19 to weigh on us for longer and is forecasting a contraction of 0.5% in 2021. So what is our response? Well, our trade recovery strategy, in fact, in the face of these challenges, we have been clear that the COVID-19 response and recovery is our top priority for New Zealand. New Zealand's health approach has been world-leading, and we can see the benefits of the team of 5 million going hard and going early. As much of the rest of the world goes back into a hard lockdown, my daughter in London being in one of many, many Kiwis offshore in that situation, we are largely free to meet, to do business, and to see our whānau and to attend events like this in person. This is proof that the best economic response has been a public health response. It is clear that trade has the potential to drive our broader economic recovery from COVID-19, and that is why we are implementing our trade recovery strategy. Our trade recovery strategy consists of 4 pillars of work, the 4 R's, to position New Zealand to recover from the economic impacts of this pandemic. Firstly, retooling. We need to put New Zealand companies in the best possible position to recover markets quickly and to seize the new opportunities. The government is providing the tools, is providing support and market intelligence to allow these businesses that are thriving through the pandemic to build on this success, whilst giving those that have endured harsh market shocks the information and the tools to rebuild and hopefully to find new opportunities. We have already rolled out a significant amount of support, including firstly NZTE, more than doubling the number of focus companies it works with and providing support to many more businesses through the new My NZTE online portal for support. Secondly, over 9,000 companies, including over 800 Māori businesses, have received COVID-19 business advisory support worth around $30 million through the Regional Business Partner Network. NZTE has also significantly built up an in-market team to provide greater support to exporters who are not able to travel. And MFAT has published over 100 market intelligence reports providing insights on COVID-19 developments in a range of countries. MFAT has also established a trade recovery unit dedicated to supporting the COVID-19 trade recovery by resolving trade barriers that businesses are finding, by working to ensure that the security of supply chains are there, and to address COVID-19 disruptions to trade, and launching a new tool to help service exporters navigate offshore markets. The second pillar of the trade recovery strategy is reinvigorating the international trade architecture, which we are doing through a number of avenues. One such avenue is, of course, the WTO, which remains the premier institution through which we can influence international trade rules. Another is through free trade agreements, which build our international connectivity. Just last month, I signed, as was said, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement for New Zealand, an agreement between 15 countries that are home to almost a third of the world's population and take over half of New Zealand's exports. RCEP is estimated to add $186 billion to the world economy and increase New Zealand's GDP by around $2 billion once fully implemented. I have to acknowledge the commitment by trade negotiators and by previous ministers to this long and enduring negotiation. I was there for the last 3 years, and it was an honour indeed to sign it on their behalf. New Zealand also recently signed a digital economy partnership agreement with Singapore and Chile. COVID-19 has demonstrated the value of our digital economy, and I've just visited 2 firms, both of which are doing very, very well in the international marketplace in the area of digital services. And the DEPA will encourage further growth of our digital trading relationships. We've launched FTA negotiations with the UK and already held 2 rounds of negotiations. We're also continuing negotiations with the EU, New Zealand's 3rd largest export market, and we hope to sign an upgrade with the New Zealand FTA between ourselves and China in the near future. Fingers crossed. If all of New Zealand's current FTA negotiations are successfully concluded and enter into force, they will cover around 76% of our exports in goods and services. To support the international trade architecture, we're also developing what we termed open plurilateral agreements, such as the DEPA and the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability, or ACTS. The ACTS was launched last year by our Prime Minister, and it is a trade agreement that will drive the reform of fossil fuel subsidies and lower the cost of environmental goods and services across the world, or at least starting with our partners in the agreement. These are agreements in areas important to New Zealand, which sustain and build upon existing trade rules. They're also designed as vehicles that other countries can join on into the future, and we welcome those new partners in those agreements. Our hosting of APEC in 2021 is also a key component of our trade recovery, and I'll touch on this in a little detail later. Refreshing key trade relationships is the third pillar of the trade recovery strategy. This means furthering trade diversification to provide exporters with more options, building our national brand and reputation, and providing new and strengthened FTAs. It also involves me getting on Zoom. Zoom was a word that I connected with comics in my upbringing. It's now part and parcel of my life, connecting with international counterparts, and I have to say most of them at ungodly hours of the night. But simply that's the world we live in. Resilience, building New Zealand's economic resilience is the final pillar of our strategy. New Zealand is dependent on foreign suppliers for many critical products. This puts us at risk in situations that impact our connectivity, as we have seen. This thinking is not about wholesale onshoring of production or stockpiling, which some other countries around the world are considering, but it's about what New Zealand and our economy needs to do to keep working. These 4 R's are the heart of our strategy to put New Zealand's exporters in the best possible position to build back better in this challenging time. Looking out beyond COVID-19 and the immediate impacts on the New Zealand economy, trade will remain absolutely critical and crucial to building the New Zealand economy and improving the well-being of all New Zealanders. The challenges that we faced before COVID-19 will not disappear overnight. New Zealand has a 6-part strategic framework to tackle these systemic challenges, which build off many strands of New Zealand's trade recovery that I've mentioned here. In the medium term, we need to continue to firstly support the WTO, secondly to embed New Zealand in key economic architecture through FTAs, thirdly to pursue a program of concerted open plurilateralism, fourthly to support global public goods that enable trade norms such as APEC and OECD. Fifthly, we need to support New Zealand businesses to succeed offshore through NZTE and NFAT networks. And sixthly, to enhance our engagement with the public on trade so that trade policy reflects the needs and views of New Zealanders. Continuing this important work is central to maintaining a global trading system that is fair and provides opportunities for New Zealand businesses to thrive. But the immediate focus of the government remains COVID-19, our health response, and our work to drive the economic recovery. The other critical piece in thinking about where to next for New Zealand trade policy is our work to ensure that trade delivers for all New Zealanders. What we call our Trade for All agenda is foundational. It underpins all of our trade policy and is essential if trade is to be successful and sustainable. The idea that people in our country don't understand the benefits of trade is perhaps a little odd, given our location and our industries, but that was the growing reality prior to our Trade for All agenda, and the fact that we have to consciously get out there and explain to New Zealanders what are the benefits of our trade. So the Trade for All process, as I say, involved extensive consultation around the country, culminating in recommendations from an advisory board on the future of our trade policy. Cabinet agreed earlier this year to implement them in 3 tranches, short, medium and longer term actions. We immediately began work to do so and are continuing on that. With COVID-19 having since intervened, we were clear that whatever was done to drive our trade and economic recovery must be underpinned by the principles of Trade for All. The sum of the Trade for All process is a trade policy that recognises and respects those things that are important to New Zealand, that is more consultative and that shares the benefits of trade more widely so that they are felt amongst all New Zealanders. It is a trade policy that supports greater engagement and inclusion, and one that ensures that the things that we do care about, like the environment, like labour rights and gender equality, are reflected in our trade policy and in our final trade agreements. It is a trade policy that fundamentally recognises the role and voice of Māori as treaty partners. We need to ensure the strengths of the Māori economy and its trade and investment potential are supported and that trade delivers for Māori. It is a trade policy that supports these institutions and mechanisms that are central to New Zealand's prosperity through trade. The WTO and its rules-based system, as we said, the FTAs and the regional trade architecture, and open plurilateralism. It is a trade policy that supports New Zealand companies to internationalise, and it is a trade policy that works to ensure that the benefits from trade are shared more evenly to all New Zealanders. Our goal is a trade policy that works to support sustainable and inclusive economic development, a triple bottom line approach of social, economic and environmental well-being. This work is absolutely fundamental and the government is committed to taking it forward. APEC 2021, almost there. I want to talk specifically about our hosting of this great event. It's hugely relevant to both our trade recovery and our efforts to make sure that trade is delivering for more people. Hosting APEC is a once-in-a-generation chance to be a regional leader on trade and economic integration. It's an opportunity that is occurring at an incredibly important juncture for New Zealand and for global trade. The impact of COVID-19 on the Asia-Pacific's people and economy, coupled with the decision to host an entirely virtual year, makes APEC 2021 an ambitious exercise in digital diplomacy. As New Zealand takes the chair of APEC, and our first meeting will be happening next week, we will be asking 3 things of APEC economies. Firstly, to join together. That is to reignite growth and a plan for long-lasting economic recovery. Secondly, to work together so that we can show leadership and innovation to work for the collective good. And thirdly, to grow together so that we will foster prosperity and well-being that is sustainable, inclusive, and digitally enabled. APEC's strength has always been in its ability to bring people together, to share experiences and ideas, and to test practical solutions to shared economic and human challenges. The response to COVID-19 and all the economic disruption that it brings necessitates a coordinated response in the Asia-Pacific region. In the context of unprecedented economic challenges and growing friction among participants, APEC's core role as a non-binding incubator of ideas and regional trade and economic norms is more important than ever. We want to continue APEC's work on digital, on regional integration, on economic policies that are inclusive of women, small and medium enterprises, and Indigenous businesses, and of course on sustainability. We're also placing our focus on ensuring trade benefits all people at the heart of our APEC work. The disruptions caused by COVID-19 through strained supply chains, through export restrictions, and an increase in trade barriers have also increased food security challenges in the region and globally. Trade allows economies to focus on the areas of comparative advantage, to produce food where it is the most efficient, and to transport it to where it is most needed. As a net food exporter, New Zealand plays an important role in food security internationally, but more importantly in the APEC region. As part of our APEC host year, New Zealand will lead the task of developing APEC's new post-2020 food security roadmap. Our goal for this work will be to support a robust and a well-functioning and sustainable food system for the whole of Asia Pacific. We expect the roadmap to guide APEC economies to leverage structural reforms in order to help retool food producers to engage the trade recovery, to promote the deployment of digital tools to enhance supply chain efficiency, and to address trade barriers and other trade distorting practices faced by food exporters in our region. Given all that is going on in the world, there could hardly be a more important time to reinvigorate APEC's work and build on APEC's brand new 20-year vision, and that is precisely what we are planning to do in hosting APEC next year. I want to conclude by reiterating that while New Zealand faces a challenging and turbulent time in our trade policy, COVID-19 remains this government's top priority, and trade will be at the forefront of our economic recovery. We are committed to working closely with exporters to provide the support they need to navigate these unprecedented challenges and to recover and grow. And we will defend those international institutions and structures that allow a small country like ours to trade fairly. We will implement our significant agenda of work to ensure that trade going forward delivers more for New Zealanders, recognises the things that we as New Zealanders hold dear, and reflects the viewpoint of Māori as our treaty partners. This work will help ensure that New Zealand emerges from COVID-19 better than before and can continue to address the longer-term challenges to global trade that we face. Thank you for the opportunity to pass on all those words to you. You play a vital role in your connection to parts of New Zealand, to people in New Zealand, to ensure that all our efforts offshore are for them, not just for a few people who are the companies that export, not just for a few of the companies that import, but indeed to have a healthy economy interacting with the rest of the world for the benefit of each and every one of us. Thank you very, very much, and congratulations once again to the University for hosting this. And I don't know whether I'm doing any questions or not, but I'm happy to take some. Kia ora. Thank you very, very much. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So we have time about 10 minutes for questions for the Minister. One here, then here. And, oh. Yes, please, Mike.
Thank you. Natasha Hamilton-Hart from the University of Auckland. What would you identify as the harder trade-offs among the strategies that you have identified for New Zealand going forward? How will you reconcile them?
Excuse me if I miss it. You're saying what would I identify as the hardest trade-offs?
Yeah, do you see any conflict among the different strategies that you described?
No, I don't. I think there may be people who view it that way, but I think as a trading nation, we have been dependent and we will be dependent on trade. But as I mentioned, ensuring that the benefits from that flow down through to each and every New Zealander. We have at the moment an incredibly successful horticultural sector. Unlike the digital sector, where I've visited a couple of companies, most of those people are very well paid. recognised for their skills, and the benefits flow right down from everything they do offshore in terms of services. If you come back to some of our goods exports, those benefits don't always flow through right to the people who may be picking, and that's a case in point. If the benefits of that growth can be realised, recognised and rewarded by everyone through that supply chain, I don't think there is a conflict. There will be some negotiations, of course, that our skilled people will work through to ensure that we protect our rights for a treaty, the Treaty of Waitangi, to make sure that we retain the right to legislate for environmental good practice, labour good practice, and I think we've managed to do that quite successfully. So I don't see a trade-off within New Zealand, but there will be, of course, trade-offs as we reach conclusion on all of our negotiations.
Kia ora, Minister. My name is George. I work at MFAT in the Trade Negotiations Division. You mentioned when discussing the 4 Rs, around the refresh area, you alluded to implementation. And my question more or less falls on implementation. Once we get these free trade agreements and other types of arrangements over the line, and we do begin the implementation process, do you have any thoughts around perhaps areas we should be focusing on for implementation to best enable a trade recovery, or perhaps areas that we haven't considered that you think we should put on our radar when we begin the implementation process?
Good question. They shouldn't be allowed to ask that one. Yeah. Look, I guess if I can take RCEP, where some people say we haven't made massive gains in terms of goods access, but the opportunity for services and consistency is where we have to work. I think as a country and as Minister for Agriculture, of course we've been passionate about our primary industries and we've still been at the heart of our export areas, but I think we have to seize the opportunities negotiated and help push forward, whether it's new areas of services. And particularly, I have a saying that we have to try and be the best country for the world. So we'll be sharing our knowledge and our culture and our experience, hopefully in ways that we can commercialise and reap some benefits from it. But actually, we're going to have to be more sophisticated in the way that we, I think, utilise our trade opportunities. And building genuine relationships with whatever country we want to work into, I think, and again, being prepared to share some of our knowledge, I think is a crucial area. So we just have to think laterally, and if you go and visit some of the companies that are out there in the wider world, they're doing things that we didn't imagine probably 10 years ago, and so we are innovative, we are pragmatic, and so looking for those opportunities that we may not see now will be really, really important. And I think organisations like MFAT and NZTE are out around the world, can sometimes identify those opportunities, making sure they can bring them back into an ecosystem that builds those opportunities.
Good afternoon, Minister. Maureen Benson-Ray from the University of Auckland Business School. Some of my former students are here, and I've been teaching internationalisation of SMEs for a long time. So I want to ask you what we're going to do onshore to support more of our entrepreneurial firms. I think during this gap in our international activities, we should be retraining, reskilling, and bringing more capabilities to our nascent entrepreneurs and growing our pre-exporting firms.
I absolutely agree, and I guess we are a nation of SMEs, and I guess giving them the capability to build to a position where they can look to export is really important. Government procurement policy will include obligations to keep the door open for SMEs and indeed for Māori business as well. We have to be proactive in these areas. And it is building that capability at a local level. And then it is through programs, a number of which you probably are familiar through NZTE, where we can help upscale. The one of investment for that growth is an interesting one. Having just been to a luncheon with bankers, that came up. Do we need to get that capital from offshore and indeed end up with partnerships, or should we be building capability and equity investment, from within New Zealand? There's a lot of money around. It goes into parts of our society. I won't necessarily say our economy. Some of it's productive, some of it's not. But if we are to build those small businesses, it's really important that we get behind them. I think as a government, we are committed to doing that. SMEs, making sure we've got money for training. We've put a huge amount of money into, a reform of the vocational education system. Making it easier for young people to get into training and education so that they provide the skills. And certainly in the IT area, we've heard for many years the shortage of skilled people to come in and build those small companies into bigger companies and then to move offshore. So it's multifaceted. We recognise the importance and we'll do everything we can.
One final question. Bran?
A few issues into one. Look, if I can just start, Minister, we've heard a lot this afternoon about education and tourism, two of our major export industries, still with no clear pathway as to when the border might accommodate even some resumption of trade, if you will. And is there a pathway set up for that that's concrete, that puts dates alongside it, that might look at embracing the realm, such as the Cook Islands as well, which is, fabulously getting impoverished as time goes by. Also embracing Australia, China, and other countries which have made strides. And the other fundamental issue brewing down on the wharves, where the shippers are in huge constraints on capacity now, and what's that going to do to a looming supply chain crunch? So two real questions.
Look, in a word, no. There's no set plan tied to a date because everything is so dynamic. And I guess, as I've said a number of times in my speech, keeping us safe from COVID and particularly keeping the Pacific realm countries and others safe from COVID is absolutely crucial. So we're going to be very cautious. The Trans-Tasman bubble is something we've talked about and we hoped for very early on, but as we've observed, in Australia things have been up and down and even today I understand there might have been a bit of a blip after what had been, I think, close to 28 days of COVID-free. So we have to be cautious, but clearly we want people back visiting our country and we want students back into our universities as quickly as we can. In terms of the trade issues, we're mindful of that. We can do our best, but we can't redirect. There are a number of complications, of course, through whether it be just in the Australian ports or be it the flow of and utilisation of containers between the major exporting nations that have diverted them from us. So we're doing everything we can, as we can, to try and ensure that our exporters, if they're producing the goods, can get them offshore. Air capacity has clearly been limited, and the cost of that. So the cherry growers, are facing, some said 6 times the cost for air freight into the summer period. That's hard to sustain, but we are doing everything we can in both air freight and sea freight to keep the channels open.
Kia ora, thank you, Minister. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the Dean of Arts, Professor Robert Greenberg, to give the vote of thanks.
Kia ora, talofa lava, kia orana, malo elelei, and bula vinaka. Mori ora ki a tātou, ko Robert Greenberg tōku ingoa, ko te manukura toitana ta aho, ko Amerika a Aotearoa tōku iwi, ko Manhattan tōku motu, ko Empire State Building toku monga, ko rafiti toku awa, no reira tēnā koto, tēnā tato katoa. Gives me great pleasure to give this vote of thanks today and to welcome all of you here. I have the privilege of being the Dean of the Faculty of Arts. My name is Robert Greenberg. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and hosts the Public Policy Institute. And we're really proud of this, our second Auckland Trade and Economic Policy School. So welcome to all. I also would like to speak to the fact that we have so many wonderful in-person guests, but we also have, I would like to welcome the guests who are also online from many different countries. And we have guests from Samoa, the Cook Islands, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Tuvalu, Canada, the UK, Korea, the Netherlands, the US, and yes, your iwi, Minister O'Connor, Ireland. It's also been a great pleasure to host you, Minister O'Connor, here in this beautiful Fale, which is the home of our Pacific Studies complex. So thank you very much for coming today. We've really enjoyed having you. As our experts have said today, and also Minister O'Connor has alluded to, of course, COVID-19 has presented major challenges to New Zealand and, of course, to the whole world. And the government, as we all know, has really put as top of its priority list keeping us safe in this pandemic, in this challenging space. And it's had a significant economic impact on us as well. But we've also heard from the minister that we have a trade recovery plan in place and new opportunities given some new multilateral agreements and approaches, such as in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that was mentioned, and the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement with Singapore and Chile. We also heard about the government's commitment to what I guess would call inclusive and sustainable trade and free trade agreements. And this is really quite significant as New Zealand takes the chair of APEC into 2021. I think all of what you've said today, Minister O'Connor, has given us much valuable information and food for thought as we move into our next day of this Trade and Economic Policy School. And we really have a lot to think about and talk about in the next day. So I think that has stimulated lots of thought and future conversation here. So on behalf of everyone, I extend to you our warmest thanks for sharing with us your vision on trade, on export, and on growth today. And I wish to ask everybody in the room to please show our appreciation for Minister O'Connor for his words today. Kia ora tātou.